And if other people are joining us on the call, they can do so. Okay, so welcome everybody. Welcome to the first schools forum of this academic year. Welcome particularly to members who are in Meeting Point House. They're waving to us and everybody else has read the top of the agenda. No, I didn't say that. Okay, so welcome, and can you just give me apologies again, Andy? We've got
Councillor Reynolds, Michael Scott, Joe Britton and Tracy Smart.
Thank you very much. And in terms of membership, Andy, we've got, I thought we'd got a new secondary maintained.
Yeah, I believe Angus Neal's now our secondary member.
Right. Head at Holy Trinity. But he's not on the call. Has he given and he hasn't given any apologies either yet?
Not seen.
Right, okay. And anybody else we need to think about in terms of membership, or have we got everybody we need at this stage?
We need a primary governors member, and we also need a member for our academy through, which is Kickstart.
Okay, I've got Yvonne on now. Hi, Penny. Okay.
Hi.
Hi, nice to see you. Okay, so we need Kickstart and we need a primary governor.
Primary governor, yeah.
Is that something, Simon, we could put out on the notice board?
Yeah, absolutely. We'll push that, and we can also go via the governor's service as well. So yeah,
Thank you.
Do that.
Thank you very much. Anything else on membership, Tim and Andy?
I think that's it, isn't it, Andy?
Except for, of course, we're looking for a new chairperson.
Yes, I was going to come on to that.
Oh,
yeah.
sorry. Okay.
So I don't know if people on the call are aware that I'm retiring. So you are going to need to. Hello, Claire. So we're going to need to appoint a new chair of Schools Forum. Talking to Andy and Tim the other day, I'm happy to chair this meeting and the one in November, but I will be finishing at Christmas. But if that gives people time to think about whether they'd be prepared to step up as chair, or if anybody's willing to take over that mantle straight away, I'm very happy to agree that. So is anybody really want to chair Schools Forum? I'm looking at my screen and asking for volunteers because we do need a chair moving forward.
I can hear the crickets, Jill.
Yeah, I can say deafening silence and everybody's on mute. So are people happy if I chair it today? And then if people want to have a conversation with me.
Yes.
And then if people want to have a conversation with me or Tim or Andy or Simon about chairing it from November or certainly from January. Yeah. So we don't want to be in a position where we haven't got a chair, obviously. Okay, is everybody happy with that? Okay, so have we done enough of the formalities on that, Andy?
Yep.
Okay, fine. All right, so I'll continue chairing today and we'll look into that.
Just say thanks for that, Jill, because we do appreciate it. Because I know you've got a limited time scale, but it's both your efforts the last few years and your willingness to carry on to the bitter end is much appreciated. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Tim. Appreciate that. Okay, so if we quickly look at the minutes of the last meeting, which I can't believe were on the 19th of May, which seems like a very long time ago because we didn't have to have a meeting that was scheduled in the second part of the summer term because there was nothing that we needed to raise with you, so we cancelled that meeting. We've had a quick look at the meeting from May. I don't think there's anything, unless Tim and Andy tell me otherwise, that we need to pick up on that we won't be covering in this meeting.
Just to comment on, there was one or two paragraphs about school balances.
Yes.
3.7 to 3.9, and it did say that we were going to do like a balances survey of maintained schools this summer, and we didn't actually end up doing that, and that was in the context subsequent to the forum the energy crisis blew up, and I think at the time we weren't sure what the government was going to do in response. So that was a potentially big cost, and there was also the pay offers which came through, which also were significantly higher than I think certainly we'd been budgeting for with the maintained schools. So in that context, and given that in both areas at the time, it was uncertain about whether the payoffs would turn into pay awards and what's happened to energy bills, we didn't actually pursue the balances survey, because although school balances have gone up quite a bit, there's an awful lot of cost pressures coming down the line as well. So just an update on that.
Thank you, Tim. And any questions on that, Tim? I think that's a very reasonable position to take at this stage, since we absolutely don't know what's going on in this country around the finances over the last couple of weeks. Okay, anything else, Tim, to pick up on the minutes?
Just glancing down. No, I don't think so.
Okay, anything from you, Simon? On the minutes? No.
No, nothing for me. Sorry. Fine.
Okay. All right, let's move on then with the agenda. So, Tim, that's going to be over to you, please, for a sort of school funding 23-24 update, please.
Okay, so this is it's not a decision-making paper. This is just to give you a sort of heads up as to where we are with school funding. There's also, we distributed the DFE's policy paper on this, which my paper is a kind of, to some extent, a short sort of précis of. So I won't go for word, but just to sort of run through it briefly. So we're now in the we will be in next year in the second year of the 3-year funding period, which increasingly confuses me because they seem to sort of come to another 3-year funding period before the first one's ended. But nonetheless, we are in another multi-year settlement. So the government is sort of following through with pretty much what they said they would do, and they've published the 23-24 per pupil funding allocations. Now, 4 members are probably aware that we get some information this summer, and we get it firmed up after the October census. So this gives us an idea of how much we'll get per pupil at Telford, but in terms of the individual school amount, that will depend upon data in the October census. So this is kind of an across the piece feel for you all in terms of the overall picture for Telford. It's not going to give you your individual school allocations. So we've done a comparison and 1.3 of 22-23, 23-24, and we've tried to do it like for like. So you might recall for 22-23, there was a normal formula allocation, and then a little bit later, there was a supplementary grant that came in, and that was allocated mainly on a per pupil basis. So to give you a better idea of what it really means, we combined the two and then compared them. So you'll see in the table, you're getting sort of, I suppose, overall an average sort of increase. So lower amounts in the basic entitlement and lump sum, somewhat higher amounts in most but not all of the deprivation indicators. So slightly, I mean, because it's a national formula, the DFE sort of do these things, and sometimes they don't entirely explain why exactly they've done what they've done. So why they've not included FSM by 4-point-something%, but they've included all the other deprivation methods by 4-point-something%. I may have missed it, but it wasn't immediately apparent to me that there was a logic behind that. And similarly, you'll see that the basic entitlement is one of the lower increases at 2.41, and that is for pretty much every school where most of your money comes from. So secondary schools very similar to primary schools. So it comes out at something around about, I'm not sure who quotes a figure here, but I think the DFE was saying it was something like 3-point-something% overall, but it will depend upon individual schools. So if your school happens to have more of sort of IDACI funding or FSM 6 funding, it'll be a bit higher. If you don't have much of that sort of funding, it'll be a bit lower. So it'll come out at something like 3-point-something% overall. And to state the obvious, that's a heck of a lot lower than general inflation now. It's also lower than the sort of the pay offers that have come through for teachers for this term and for local authority staff from April. Now, clearly, we've got a lot of academies now, so the local authority side doesn't directly apply, but equally, you're in the same market for staff, aren't you? So, you know, if you have a pay award from the local authority side, it probably is going to push academy pay as well in a similar direction. So we have to wait and see, because as Jill alluded to, even in the last couple of weeks, there's been sort of fairly significant financial events taking place at a national level, which sooner or later percolate through to schools. So what exactly sort of inflationary pressures will turn out to be in 23-24, we'll have to see. I mean, we obviously don't know what payoffs are going to be, for example. But at present, it looks like a settlement, which I think I read a paper by the IFS, and they were looking at actual school inflation, and their feeling was the sort of amounts here don't quite match what they anticipate school inflation to be, but it's like 1% short or something. But obviously that's based on what we know now. As we found, this can all change. So basically, it's clearly not a generous award for next year in the context of where we are. How ungenerous it appears to be will depend upon things that happen between now and April or September. So that's sort of dealing with the actual amounts of money. The other thing going on is the government's move towards a fully national funding formula, which we've talked about many times before, so I won't labour the point, but you'll be aware that locally we decided we converge our formula to the national one about 3 years ago, something like that, because we felt if it was coming along the line, we might as well avoid turbulence. So because of that, some of the extra measures the governments have announced to sort of bring authorities closer and closer to the national formula, we're kind of already there. So it doesn't really make much difference to us. Things that do affect us is, for example, how much we get for growth funding, which we don't know yet. If we get a bit more than we end up dishing out for growth, we put that into the main funding formula, so the values go up a bit. If it's the other way around, like I think it was this year, 22-23, we bring the values down a bit. So things like that can affect it a bit, but in essence, we already mirror the national formula and will continue to do so. That's the kind of the nub of it, really. Apart from that, again, they've now set the national minimum funding guarantee. This is the per pupil guarantee. It's between 0% and a maximum of 0.5%. We normally, if we can afford it, head for the maximum, so it'll be 0.5 unless we've run out of cash for some reason. And that's about it. So it's really, from our point of view, for your point of view, it's a steady as she goes sort of budget. We'll get the money, we'll dish it out via the NFF as close as we can. A few things around the edges, such as growth, might affect it, but in essence, we'll just carry on what we've done for the last few years. And we've got, Tim, we've got a protocol around growth funding established now, haven't we? So we know where we're going with that. Yeah, the difference for members might remember is that either the last form or the one before, but it's recent form anyway. Previous to sort of now, we've just been allocating growth on the basis of increased PANs, or schools agreeing with us to take pupils above the PAN. And then for those schools, we base on estimated numbers. But we're now supplementing that with a new school element. So we hadn't had new schools for a couple of years. It wasn't needed. But also, if you've got a new school and you've got A, startup costs, B, diseconomies of scale, then the growth fund is used to fund those things as well. So we'd agreed before on the principles of how we're going to do that. Again, we'll firm up the details of how much that will be once we know a bit more about the circumstances. I mean, the next one is the one of your trust schools, Jill, opening next September, isn't it? Yeah. But there will be one or two after that coming along as well. Excellent. All right. Any questions on schools blocks? I'll move on to the other blocks if not. I think just to summarise that, Tim, a little bit is, it's choppy waters ahead, I think. It's probably an understatement, but, the unfunded pay award is already causing significant angst in the sector. The NEU are balloting over the pay award anyway. So that, I think it's very uncertain times really about school budgets, if I'm being. And I think you can almost kid yourself that we get all this data because you've got loads of data. We can sort of tell you what's really going on in terms of the impact. But in reality, a lot of this, we're all just buffeted national events, aren't we? Yeah. We had COVID, which obviously had an impact on school finances one way or the other. And now we've got, in recent years, fairly predicting. So you do have to react. We'll just see whether anything significant changes between now and 23-24, and if the government then reacts to that anything significant changing. Yeah, we'll have to see.
Okay, so John, I need.
So high needs. So again, we've got an indicative increase. It'll be firmed up with the October data once we've got numbers of pupils in special schools, etc. First thing to notice is that it's significantly lower than the increase we've had in recent years. So 1.9 million. We've been having something between a minimum of about 2.5, maximum between 3.5 and 4 in the last sort of probably 3 years. The DFE did give us a notice that it was going to be the case. They said based it on about 5%. We've got a bit more than that. It's about 6%. So I suppose in that sense it's slightly better than we would have thought. So it's more money, but as we sort of again said in forums, we've done quite well in high needs compared to nationally. So you know, we went into deficit once a few years ago, fairly modest degree, got out of that, kept modest surpluses in the last few years, but that is in the context of getting, well, let's say 3 million quid a year more for, you know, simplistic purposes. So if we're getting £1 million less than that, then okay, it's still more money, but it means the trajectory of our expenditure growth can't really continue in the same way. Otherwise, we will end up getting into debt again. So we're not in any sort of crisis, but equally there is sort of grey clouds gathering on the horizon a little bit, I think. Recovery programs, one called Safety Valve, one called Delivering Better Value in SEND, and about half local authorities in one of those two programs at the moment, about 75 to 150. So there are widespread difficulties in this area. You'll also be aware that there was green paper published in March about SEND, and this is a paper which had been long awaited. They've been trailing it for at least a couple of years. So I did read it with a sort of financial perspective, but I was struggling to see much, if anything, in that would really make any difference to the financial pressures. You know, it wasn't directed at finances per se, but clearly the financial problems you would think form quite a bit of the context, but I couldn't see there was much in there that's going to change things around. So unless I'm missing something, the pressures will continue. As I say, we're in a better position than the local authorities, but I suppose what I'm saying is I wouldn't want anyone to be complacent about where we are.
I think that's absolutely right. Yeah. And I don't think the green paper touched on finance because it's too difficult.
Well, it's difficult to say anything that wouldn't be unpopular, cynical about it, so they don't want to go there, do they? But, you know, they're sort of assuming, I think, that their interventions are going to work. So the interesting thing will be in 2 years' time, authorities that have like 10, 15 million pounds of DSG debt and are being given some money by the DFE, I should say, to help them out, but only a relatively small proportion of that debt. Have they actually managed to address it? If the debt's still sitting there at £1 billion or whatever it is, then at some point something else will have to happen.
Heather, you got a question?
Oh, it's me. Sorry, we're on the same Teams chat. Just I mean, Tim's given a really strong narrative there around our position around high needs and DSG, and he talked about other local authorities being in millions of pounds of deficit. We are talking about other local authorities being in millions of pounds of deficit here. So I think we just do need to recognise that our local system is strong, and we work really, really closely to make sure we manage that budget. So I just want to thank everybody for that. But I think Tim is right as well to recognise the grey clouds. We have benefited, as they have nationally, for that significant increase in investment in high needs. Our budget isn't sustainable, so we still have to be on that efficiency drive. But yeah, just wanted to recognise that as a local system, you know, we must continue to work in partnership to manage that budget and keep it under control. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Simon. Any questions on high needs? I think it's something that we're going to have to come back to as the year rolls on. Okay.
Sorry, Jill, can I just
Yeah,
ask?
Rachel, you.
To do with the EDACI, however you pronounce it, it would be really handy for schools to have a profile of what their EDACI breakdown is. Is that possible? I think, Andy, we've talked about that before. Just to give an idea of context when we're talking about that element in inspection, etc.
Yeah, when we get the APT in December, it'll contain all the data. So once that comes in, I can distribute it if you want it.
Yeah.
I would find it personally really useful, but I'm guessing colleague primary heads would as well. Yvonne, would you?
I'm
Yeah,
very gratified to
absolutely.
see you interested in our financial data, Rachel. I'd like to say this is a daily occurrence, but it's not.
I think
Thank you.
it does give you, like you say, Rachel, it gives you a profile of number of children you've got and something about the community you serve, doesn't it, in terms of that profile?
I mean, I would, because I'm, I suppose, a financial geek, but if I'm looking at a school, I'm always looking at this sort of data and thinking, why is the IDACI a bit higher than you expect looking at free school meals? Is it because this is in an area of kind of, private rent accommodation where people aren't rich, but they're struggling a bit, and it's different from being in a sort of, in a sort of big council estate. All that sort of stuff is all grist to my mill. So I'm very gratified that other people have some sort of interest in it as well.
Well, we used to
Not
get
that obsessed, Tim.
Well, we used
Well,
to,
you
didn't
and me.
we? In the old days, we used to get a lot more accurate data about the profile of our cohort than we do these days. They've cut down that information that we get.
The only problem with some of our data, it's so out of date. I can't remember. Is
Yeah.
IDACI one where it's like a decade or something, Andy? I forget, because some of they update fairly regularly and others they leave for a while.
No, it's quite up to date. I think it's 2013.
Oh,
We-
there you
and-
are, within a
and-
decade, you see.
And they haven't got any plans to update it. I don't think was the last thing they said. They seemed quite pleased with themselves that it was only 10 years out of date. But, yeah.
Which in a place like Telford, where you've looked at massive changes in the growth of housing and the population in Telford, that's really comforting.
Yeah,
Okay. All right. Thanks, Tim. And
early years, I think, is the next bit.
Central Schools block.
Early
Schools
years, I
Services
think,
block.
is an excellent. Oh, Central Schools, we quite right. I missed that. Yes, right. So Central School Services block, perennially the poor relation of the 4 blocks. So everything else at least gets some sort of increase. Whereas with this one, it's been pretty much cash flat for Telford for the last few years. So we lose 2.5% per annum because we were on a protected amount. So the DfE thought their sort of starting point was higher than it should be. Difficult to believe, I have to say, given the modest summons, but nonetheless. So we lose 2.5%, but then we have had pupil growth year on year for the last few years. So we end up with a very sort of similar cash sum, only about 1.1 million. So we'll have to wait until see the October data, but it'll probably be the same again. And then it all gets allocated. Well, I'll say to central services, a big chunk goes to pay for licenses, doesn't Andy? So the government pays for central licenses for schools, and it costs several £100,000, isn't it? I think it's a fair sum, and you have to pay that. So that gets deducted, leaves us with 800 and something thousand left, I think, to pay for central services. Yeah. So it's pretty much the same as last few years, to summarise all that.
Thank you. Early years.
Early years. So it'd be nice if they announced this at the same time as schools and high needs, but they never seem to, for reasons best known to the DfE. So there's been a consultation running recently, quite a technical one, which it isn't really of, I think, dramatic interest to many, but it's they've had quite a lot of authorities on protected arrangements, so they're trying to move away from that to a sort of so most authorities are on a more formulaic basis. So there's some changes to the way they're going to calculate funding with some protection in place. So we're not really sure what the impact will be on Telford Wrekin, but they have said there's a minimum increase of 1%. If I look at the national figure for the amount of money available, it's similar-ish to last year, slightly more, and that was a 3.5% overall. So if you're guessing, you might say that Telford, all things being equal, will get 3.5%-ish, maybe, which I suppose, as we said, looking at the schools funding allocation is not dissimilar to that. But, for example, is unlikely to be matching anywhere near the increased national living wage, which has been going up in recent years quite a lot beyond inflation. And given the level of inflation, it's difficult to believe it won't go up again by a fairly significant amount. So again, it's not a disastrous settlement for early years, but I would say it is a pretty tight settlement again, I have to say.
And again, with increased costs, on staffing,
Exactly.
that is going to pressurise the system. I don't know, Penny, you got any views on that?
Yeah, it's going to be quite hard, especially with all, like everybody else, costs going up. unfortunately just means that the parents that fees will go up in settings.
Yeah.
So and obviously with the major staffing problem we all have in early years at this moment in time, yeah, I think it's going to be quite a hard 12 months, 2 years ahead really for early year settings.
It's one of the things I've never understood, why early years doesn't get a higher level of funding, because if we could fix the problems down in early years,
Yeah,
yeah,
absolutely.
make all our lives easier. And I just never understand that disproportionate attitude towards funding early years.
Yeah, and at the moment early years are going through they're looking at ratios within PVI settings.
Yeah, yes.
And increasing the ratios, which is absolutely detrimental, especially with the amount of high needs children we've got coming through at this moment in time. And it's not just your normal SEND, it's actually complex needs, which are blowing us out the water at the moment.
Yeah, and I think we'd say that in our nurseries as well. Needs are huge, aren't they?
Yeah, massive.
The last thing you want to do is reduce your staffing ratios.
Absolutely.
But,
well, especially with the complex needs that are coming through.
Yeah.
You know, children non-ambulant, in chairs, etc., etc. You know, it's just massive for settings, and settings aren't really built to take that type of equipment.
No, I agree. Okay, I think we just need to be aware that there's a real pressure in the early years settings here, moving forward. Not that we can do a huge amount at this stage, but I think just for Forum to be aware that's another cost pressure on people.
Mm-hmm.
And any other comments on that from members? I think everybody was just nodding that it's not easy and there's some real challenges there. Okay, Tim, do you want to finish off?
Yeah, so just to summarise, then the highest increase is about 6% in high needs. The other blocks, it sort of ranges from 0 in central school services to 3 or 4 in schools or high needs. But I think in all those areas, given the sort of the cost pressures around, it's quite a tight settlement, I would say, all round really. How tight, we'll have to wait to see what cost pressures are like next year.
Yeah, I think it's as ever, we're going to be under pressure in the system, inevitably. Okay, any other comments to Tim? He's always full of good news, I know that, you know. It's the reason he gets out of bed in the morning, isn't it, Tim?
It is, yes.
Yeah.
That's nice.
No, I have attended the odd meeting where you said this is good news, you know.
Exactly,
in the
yes. I'm
last
glad you
20
said that,
years.
not force me to say it defensively. Yes, exactly. Yes.
Okay, members, we're doing really well, because this is actually a very short agenda today, just for the start of term. So, Tim, and I think we're already on to any other business. I know we've got this letter from the trade unions on facility time, which is a subject I hate discussing, and I never really understand why it comes to Forum. But do you want to give any background to this letter, Tim?
Yeah, obviously we could have put this as an agenda item, and I sort of didn't because I felt we'd been around this block with Forum, you know, a number of times. And I didn't think there was likely to be any appetite to go back to dedelegation, which is in substance what the letter is asking us to do. And just to remind Forum members of the further background to this, the difficulty with dedelegation is it only applies to the maintained sector.
Yeah.
So once a Forum's made a decision on dedelegation, it binds maintained schools to that decision. So there's no choice for maintained schools. So the union suggests we do that, and then we go out to academies and say we've done that, and invite academies to allocate money in the same way. But we have no powers whatsoever to compel academies. So we end up with a sort of a two-tier system. And we have a system for maintained schools, which is giving maintained schools no choice beyond the Forum decision, but academies are left to decide on an individual trust basis what to do. So in the past, in that context, Forum members haven't wanted to go down this path. So instead, I think you all know this, but just as a reminder, you get contacted each year individually via sort of collective email and asked whether your school or trust wants to contribute, and some do, some don't. So that's the sort of default but the unions would like us to go back to dedelegation. And they do say, by the way, that many local authorities have never gone away from dedelegation, which I've always found a bit surprising given the increase in academies, but I have no information that directly contradicts that, so I assume that is probably the case. So I'll stop there, and obviously if anyone's got any views, then.
I mean, my first comment when we talked about it, Tim, was I'm surprised the NASUWT are not signed up on this, so that was quite interesting. There's a lot of members in Telford in the NASUWT. And I suppose one of my views is that, and I suppose look at you, Simon, that maybe it should go to primary and secondary heads, because that discussion perhaps needs to be had at head teacher level around union facility time. For example, in the trust, our trust, we pay into union facility time because we believe in supporting the trade unions. We employ a lot of people, and we want to enjoy good industrial relations with the trade unions. So we do buy in. I think quite a number of trusts locally do, but then it's a choice for heads, depending what sector they're in, to decide what they want to do with trade union facility time. But I was quite surprised to see this letter because it's sort of it ebbs and flows, but I think it's down to the trade union to make those representation to head teachers, and sort of coming through the forum I'm not sure is incredibly helpful, because I think some heads would be incensed if the forum made a decision on their behalf on this issue.
Okay, I'll just come in there, Jill. Yeah, I can take that point, and I think as an action, Tim and I can have a conversation about how best to liaise with the forum. But yeah, I'll take the point, and we can do that. Yeah.
Because I've met with Matthew Rain, who's the new NUU guy. Telford seems very reasonable chap, but maybe he should be given the opportunity to talk to heads. I assume it's still Lisa with the NASUWT.
Yeah, it is. And I have a termly meeting with the trade union reps as well. And so this is on the agenda. We can talk with them about how to move that forward. Yep.
Just didn't want to take it away from the heads, but it's down to the trade unions to sort of sell their wares on this one, in my opinion. Rachel.
Have we not missed the boat this year on that, Tim? Because you sent out that email to individual heads quite a length of time ago, and I'm just wondering, isn't that decision already made now by way of individual heads who've responded to you?
Well, if we de-delegated, it would override it. So if a maintained school had said no and the forum de-delegated, this is for sort of, well, it's a bit ambiguous both, because we do it now by academic year, and the de-delegation, because it applies to maintained schools, would have to be from next April. But the forum does have the power to make that decision from next April. But yes, you're quite right that we have sent out letters and have had responses back from schools about contributions for the academic year 22-23, on the assumption, Rachel, that there's pretty much no chance whatsoever that the forum is going to go down the de-delegation route. That was my working assumption.
I think it's difficult that it's either one choice or another. Isn't there a halfway house where people, is that literally it's you either do or you don't? Isn't there sort of, I don't know enough about it, but like pay as you go or something option? Do you know what I mean?
We had that discussion with them before, and so I've been involved in this. Oh God, I don't know how many years we've discussed it, and that's what heads wanted, Rachel. Can we pay as you go? What the union issue is, but we want these people in post. So the union facility time pays for their 2 days a week of union time. So their school contracts them for 5 days, but they get 2 days paid through union facility time to do union work. And therefore, in order to guarantee to the school who has that rep, then to be able to release them, that's why they want that pot of money. Whereas a pay-as-you-go means, they have no, if you like, financial stability to be able to release somebody from a contract to do union facility time. So we did discuss it at length, and they were very loath, if I remember, to go down that route. And the problem is, if you need a trade union rep and you don't pay trade union facility time, then you just have to wait in line to get any response from the trade union. Often it will then go to regional because the area person will say, well, they don't buy in and all my time's used up for the next 3 or 4 weeks. So it's a really, it is tricky.
It is.
And you know, and I remember having the conversation, if you remember it, Claire, on forum a few years ago, and certain, you know, heads of small primary schools were saying, well, you know, I've never ever had to encounter an issue with a trade union. That's just never happened in my school. But in
Very
life,
much so that was the conversation, Jill. I think that the pay-as-you-go was around using it, you know, rather than having just a service that you buy into. If you need it, can we not pay for it when we need it? But obviously logistically that's difficult for them. Some heads' views were around, you know, actually I've got good relations with my employees, I manage Matt as well, and it's a rarity that, you know, or some would say haven't had to have union involvement at all. And then there was some discussion, Rachel, around transparency as well, asking the union reps to sort of present the hours that they have worked, so we could get a feel for, you know, the funding that was required. And there was a reluctance, I think, trying to say it as diplomatically as possible, to provide that information. And again, some colleagues were saying often the meetings are actually after school, so they're not, people are not actually coming out during the day for meetings because their meeting are teachers sort of post 4 o'clock. So why do we need to pay those sort of supply costs to release them and backfill those places in school? But those were some of the things that were brought up at the time, and we just couldn't get an agreement really, a consensus from heads.
yeah, well done, Claire. I knew you'd remember. I knew there was all sorts of issues there, but yeah, it was that transparency, because we were asking them, saying, well, if we're paying this money, we want to see your caseload, you know, what's an average year look like in terms of casework, so that we could see that there was sort of a value for money argument. But that sort of fell on a bit of deaf ears really, and we never really got that level of information. So the whole thing just sort of, it was left where it is now. You choose to buy in or you don't. And if you then need union representation, then, you know, that has to be dealt with by that school. You know, the head has to take that on board. Okay, but I think, Simon, to be politically correct, it would be good to invite the trade unions to talk at the relevant forums, because I think at least we're showing we're reacting to this letter. And actually saying we don't think it's really a forum issue, we think it's a head teacher issue. And if heads want a delegation, it could come back to forum, couldn't it?
Yeah, and I've just been reminded, Jill, that there has been some involvement from the unions at cluster meetings last year. So I'll go back with the message to them about the conversation. So yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Have you any other business, Tim?
Just one other paper that we distributed, which was showing how we've allocated part 1 of the SEN contingency fund.
Yeah.
So we do this in 2 tranches, first for the summer term, 5 months, and then for the autumn and spring terms, 7 months. And we're trying to identify schools, in essence, who've got more SEND in the school than demographics would suggest. So unless people want me to, I won't go through the wonderful way we do this, but the essence is we try and identify schools with, as I said, more SEND than demographics, and then we allocate some funds, fairly modest sums in most cases, because there's £100,000 in total in this part of it. What you've got in front of you is 7/12 of that £100,000. It's 58,000 and a bit. But for what it's worth, we do have a number of schools which tend to get allocations from this year in, year out. So, you know, the sort of issue we've always had in SEND, where the assumption that schools can pay the first £6,000 of costs from the funding formula, which would be fine and dandy if SEND is distributed exactly in accord with schools' demographics. But because we can see similar schools coming up year in, year out, we know it isn't, and it isn't just something that corrects itself necessarily from one year to the next. It does sometimes just continue on. So we show this to the forum so you can see how we do it and what amounts been distributed and who's getting what.
Thanks, Tim. We won't go on about fair share because, you know, I'll go into a small rant, but which I've done. So there's no point me commenting on that.
Just a reminder, Jill, perhaps for everyone, I mean, hopefully people know this, but this is part 1 of the Fair Share Fund. There's also a part 2, which is schools can apply individually, and that gives an opportunity for schools to make the case in the round rather than just, as this does, looking at data and having a cash limited sum. So we are trying to address the issue, but you know, it's part of the system that's difficult to fully compensate for, I think.
Thank you, Tim. Any comments on that from members? Right, well, you've all behaved very, very well on this call. So we've hurtled through the agenda. So is there any other business from members? Robert?
Sorry, and apologise if it's been asked question. It's just a quick question for Simon. Obviously, we talked back in May or back in March, we did about the school improvement budget where we de-delegated some fund to the school improvement service. Is there an update on how that money's been allocated and spent, please? Or can I ask that?
I'm gonna, do you know what? What a shame. I've got to go because it's 10:15, and I did say at the beginning that I've got to go. Right, Rob, let me come back. Can we talk about that at the next school forum? Let's put it on the agenda item and give a proper paper and an update about what we've been doing around that. Can we do that?
I'm happy. I'd be interested where the money's gone. So yes, please.
Thank you.
I think it's on the partnership board agenda for discussion, isn't it? At some point, Simon.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks, Robert, for reminding us of that. Interesting
Pleasure.
area because it's gonna come back and bite us, I'm sure. Okay. Any other comments from members? No. Right. Do you remember the summer holidays? They were something that we did in August. Okay. I'm sure everybody's had a really busy start to term. I think it's felt fairly frantic everywhere, but I hope next few weeks go well, and look forward to seeing you on the next call. So take care, look after yourselves. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.